You're listening to episode 58 of A Whole New You podcast. On today's show, we tackle a very important topic. It's one that can feel overwhelming at times, but creating awareness around it is absolutely necessary for optimal health. Building biologist Cathy Cooke gives us some great tips to decrease our exposure from cell phones, Wi-Fi, and EMFs. Even if we eat healthy and exercise, our environment can make us sick. This episode will empower you to make savvy consumer decisions that will help you reduce any harmful exposure. Welcome to A Whole New You podcast. I'm your co-host, Kim Maravich. I'm a registered nurse and author of the book 360 Health. I'm joined by my dear friend, Lori Biddle, a health and wellness coach certified through the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. Our show exists to inspire and empower women to take charge of their health, with weekly tips and conversation about self-care, mindset, nutrition, fitness, and clean living. Please keep in mind that the material provided in this podcast is intended as general information only and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. We're thrilled to have you here. Let's get to the show. Before we get to the show, I'd like to read a 5-star review that we received through iTunes. This is from Jay Waylert. She says, "Love this podcast. I have learned so much from the variety of topics that they talk about. I would recommend this podcast to any listener." Thank you so much for taking the time to leave us this review. Reviews and subscribers help boost our rankings in iTunes, and they help people find our show who might not already know about it. So if you're listening right now, why don't you pause the show and head over to iTunes? There is a clickable link in the show notes. You can subscribe there and also leave us a rating and review. If you do, we'll be sure to read your review on a future episode.
Welcome to another episode of A Whole New You podcast. Today I'm here with Cathy Cooke. She is a Board Certified Holistic Nutritionist with the National Association of Nutritional Professionals. She uses a functional medicine approach to help people identify imbalances in the body. She is also a certified building biology, environmental consultant, an electromagnetic radiation specialist with the International Institute of Building Biology and Ecology. She assesses buildings for anything that may be causing health problems, including indoor air quality, mold, chemical off-gassing, ventilation, and EMF exposure. Combining holistic nutrition and building biology, she addresses both the body and the environment to help her clients achieve optimal health. Hi, Cathy. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, Lori. I'm so delighted to be here.
Well, this is a very, very important topic. And Cathy and I were chatting a little bit, before we hit record. And, I really want to make sure that our listeners leave here today understanding how important it is for us to start to take control of some of these environmental factors, because it's way too easy to just say, there's just too much and there's too much coming at us from every angle and I can't do anything about this. I can't control it. So you just don't even take that step. So, we have a lot more control than we think. There's certainly a lot of things we can do to reduce our exposure. And the very first step to all of that is just getting educated. And Cathy's going to help us with that today. And I myself am really looking forward to this conversation. I have a lot to learn on this topic, and I'm always looking to reduce exposure. And again, she's going to give us a lot of good, actionable things that we can do and start to take control of this in our homes. So Cathy, I would love to hear what got you interested in this line of work and how did you get started in this field?
Yeah, great question. So, like many of us who have come to this, health field, I had my own health symptoms, my own health challenges for decades. So I'm currently in my mid-40s, and when I was 12, I was bit by a tick, and really I've kind of never been the same since. So, you can call it, I don't know, tick-borne illness or Lyme or whatever, but since that transition, my health has just been a big challenge for me. So over the years, I had to kind of dig really deep into all things health in order to help myself because, as many of your previous guests have talked about, the conventional medicine model doesn't really have a lot to offer for some of these chronic conditions. So I actually was working in the nonprofit sector for about 15 years before I finally decided, I know so much about health because I've really had to dig really deeply into my own health issues. Why don't I make this a career? So in about 2014, 13, 14, I got my certificate in holistic nutrition and became board certified with the National Association of Nutritional Professionals, as you mentioned. And, that was a big step for me. And that gave me some more tools to really work on my health because while I had made a lot of progress, I still had a big way to go in order to really fine tune some of my issues because I had other things going on besides just the tick-borne illness. I had really high mercury levels. I had some mineral imbalance and some hormonal issues because when you get one kind of big health issue, a lot of other things can kind of act as co-infections or um, you know co-issues because your immune system is challenged and you're kind of vulnerable to some other health issues. Um, so then, as I was working as a nutritionist and really developing my skills as a functional medicine practitioner, I still had a couple issues that I could not clear up, namely pretty severe insomnia and tinnitus, ringing in my ears, and some anxiety and irritability that no matter what I did, my diet was excellent. I mean, my exercise routine, my stress management, everything was really tuned in, but I couldn't get a handle on those last few issues. So this is when I dug really deep into the environment because that was the one piece that I hadn't really addressed yet. And, when I was researching insomnia in particular, the topic of EMFs or electromagnetic fields kept coming up. And I don't have, my background was nonprofit work, and I do not have a head for electricity, so it was so overwhelming to me. And I would read books and I would read websites, and it would talk about magnetic fields and radio frequency and microwatts per square meter, and I was like, this is so over my head. So I just kept turning it off because it was so overwhelming. Well, eventually I got enough information that I thought, okay, people are saying to turn off your phone and turn off your Wi-Fi. Well, I can at least do that. So I gave it a shot after several years of trying to ignore it. And when I unplugged my Wi-Fi and I stopped using my phone for it was about a week, but within about 3 days of that, the ringing in my ears that had been there for over 10 years was completely gone, 100% gone. And
Wow.
yeah, I mean, it was so profound to me. It blew my mind. So I thought, okay, what's going on here? I have to dig a little deeper. And then my sleep gradually got better. Actually, it was pretty instantaneous. I mean, it only takes a night or two where I went from being up for, most of the night to sleeping most of the night. So I went from laying there and not being able to sleep for 3 to 4 hours to falling asleep within 10 minutes.
Hmm.
And it was so profound to me and really still so over my head that I knew I was going to have to just bite the bullet and become certified in this so that I could learn as much as I could because it had such a big impact on my health that and I knew, this was maybe 2016. I knew that all of this stuff is only going to increase. We're not, this isn't a one-time fix. This is going to be an exponential exposure as we go, through the years. That we're going to having more and more radio frequency, more and more wireless gadgets, all this stuff. So I knew I had to learn as much as I could about it if I was going to protect myself. And so that's when I became certified as a building biologist.
Wow. Yeah, this is This is a big deal. And that made a huge difference. So were you turning it off? You turned it off for a week completely, the Wi-Fi and the phone.
Right. And, I still had a job at the time. I was working as a nutritionist for Natural Grocers, which is a small health food store. Well, it's not small anymore. It's a large health food store chain that is mostly the Midwest and West. So I don't think there's any in the East Coast yet. But I was working for a nutritionist at the store, and they have Wi-Fi in the store, and everybody's shopping with their phones. So I wasn't able to decrease my exposure completely, but inside my home, I
Mm-hmm.
I could. And we're mostly concerned about your sleeping environment. So, because that's where you're resting, you're recovering, your body is, your immune system's most active at night, and your lymph drainage from your brain is happening. All really, really important things that we need to optimize. So, just by cleaning up my home environment and my sleeping environment was very, very impactful.
Right. Because honestly, we're sleeping, hopefully, for a pretty large chunk of our day.
Hmm.
And we don't need to be using our phones. We don't need our Wi-Fi while we're sleeping. So, I mean, that's a pretty good first step. Because a lot of people are sleeping with their phone in their bed, like right
Right.
next to them on their pillow, and it's
Under their
on.
pillow. Oh,
And
yeah. I know many, many children, teenagers, and adults, grown men and women that sleep with their phones under their pillows. And I cannot think of a worse habit, honestly.
right, because that's what they're looking at before they fall asleep, which is a whole nother issue.
Hmm.
but but then, it just plops down on your nightstand, in your bed. And in the defense of most people, they just don't know what an impact it has, until that's why this podcast is so important. Until you really stop and you listen to it and you acknowledge it
Yeah.
and again realize that you can make some simple changes that can have a really big impact as far as decreasing exposure. So I love that you said, that turning off the phone, turning off the Wi-Fi just in your own home,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, it's substantial.
yeah, you're eating right, you're exercising, you're doing all the things, right? But you're still not feeling well. Like our environments can make us very sick. And it doesn't, like, you can't eat yourself or exercise yourself out of that situation. So,
Absolutely. That's absolutely. And that's what I tell people all the time. It's the best diet in the world. My specialty is actually sleep, because I had severe insomnia for so long.
mhm.
That's so I had to learn everything I possibly could about sleep. So I'm telling my clients all the time, I don't care what you're eating, how much CrossFit you're doing, how many marathons you're running. If you're not sleeping at night, you're undoing all that good, or you're making it worse because you're trying to kill it and you're not sleeping. And this is such a huge piece of that, this EMF exposure. Or, on the other side, we could talk about air quality. If you're sleeping in a house with mold or poor ventilation, or all of these chemicals off gassing from your furniture and your carpet, you know, all of these play a really, really critical factor in your health.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. So let's go back to the EMFs, just because, as you mentioned, this is such a big issue and only going to become a bigger issue and honestly get worse as time goes
Yeah.
on because everything's just getting more and more digital. But when you Google this and you research this,
Mhm.
right? I mean, there's a lot of things sending the message that this is safe. But why do we need to educate ourselves, and why do we need to be concerned?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because this is one of the areas that I get very passionate about. I don't personally need all the scientific research to tell me that this is safe or it is not safe, because I know firsthand how I feel when I'm around it. So
Hmm.
I mean, I definitely care what the science says, but for me personally, I don't care, because I know how I feel and I know how much better my life is when I minimize it. However, let's talk about the science. So I actually get a kind of a surprising amount of hate, towards my profession and towards my point of view around this. So when I'm chatting with people, if it's out in public or if it's on Facebook or in, forums somewhere, people call me a snake oil salesman. They say I'm a fear monger. I'm just doing this to, drum up business. All of these things. And it really took me by surprise when this first started happening. I was like, why are people hating on me so much for this? Like, I'm trying to educate and bring awareness so people can feel better. But what I realized is there is, phone addiction, cell phone addiction is very, very real for many reasons, beyond the scope of this conversation, but for the dopamine rush and, the habits, the connectivity, the EMF exposure, all these things. And when I am talking about reducing exposure, I'm threatening their toys and I'm threatening their addiction. And that's a very real thing that I wasn't necessarily prepared for when I started this, education campaign of mine. So people will say, well, I've looked into this. I've been researching this, and it's clearly been proven safe, or the science isn't even, the jury's still out on the science. And I say to them, okay, you probably did a 5-minute Google search and you read a couple of articles. I've been researching this pretty much full time for about 5 years. And I can tell you there is a massive difference between the industry funded research versus the independent research.
Right.
And we can't deny the fact that when you look something online, the results that come up have a lot to do with financial influence. So if I have the best website in the world and I am paying someone to do SEO, search engine optimization, that is just killing it, those results are going to come up. And we all know that the telecom industry, which is the biggest industry of all time and has more money than any industry ever, has significant influence in getting their message out there. So when we're looking at the quote unquote science and what comes up when we are looking online, it's unfortunately not representative of the actual facts. So in my research, when I've been looking at the independent science, it is overwhelming. The science is absolutely overwhelming about the biological impact that it has on our bodies. But, this is not in the interest of the telecom industry. I mean, this is the same thing as tobacco or lead or asbestos or any of these industries that want to keep their industry alive. And, they're thinking about their bottom line. If it were to come out that this does have some biological harm, it would be a disaster. So, the independent research is very, very clear, and I could talk about how it affects us on a, cellular level if you would like to, but people really need to be aware when they're looking this up online, and everything is reassuring them that this is completely safe, that there's a whole lot more information out there that is telling us the opposite. So we need to just be aware of that.
Right.
Now we'd like to take a minute to give a shout out to our show partners, Perfect Supplements and Amazon. Perfect Supplements is a family-owned and operated business that supports local farms. Their superfoods and supplements are non-GMO, third-party tested for purity, and contain no synthetic ingredients, colors, or flavors. They're also organic or wild harvested and fairly traded. Products range from collagen and bone broth powders to plant proteins, greens, desiccated liver, and adaptogenic herbs. Perfect also carries vitamins and supplements from other reputable sources like Just Thrive, Dr. Mercola, Gaia Herbs, Green Pastures, Garden of Life, and Prescript Assist. To check out their wide array of products, go to perfectsupplements.com/Kim. If you use coupon code KIM10 at checkout, you'll get 10% off your order. This is a great way to get superfood nutrition while helping to support our podcast. And just as a disclaimer, it's not the intention of our podcast to provide specific medical advice, but rather to provide you with information to better understand the role of dietary supplements in health. We urge you to consult with a qualified health provider to discuss both the advantages and risks of using dietary supplements. Our other show partner, Amazon, is the largest online warehouse and carries just about everything you need. If you shop on Amazon, which is likely, you can support our show at the same time at no additional cost to you. Simply use our affiliate link to enter the site, then browse and buy, just as you normally would. A Whole New You podcast will make a small commission from your purchase, which helps to support production costs for the show. You can find a clickable Amazon link in the show notes for this episode. You can also go to the products page of our website, awholenewyouPodcast.com, to find the link. If you love our show and appreciate the free information you get each week, please consider buying from Perfect or using our affiliate link when making purchases on Amazon. Now let's get back to the show.
Back to the example of like the Wi-Fi and the phone. Like, what's the specific health concern, and what's the difference? Like, is the phone more of a threat than the Wi-Fi, or like, what's the difference between the two, or are they the same when it comes to these electromagnetic fields?
Sure, good question. So there are actually, in building biology, there are 4 fields that we are testing for and that we're concerned about. And when we say EMFs and we're talking about this topic, most of us are thinking about the radio frequency, which, as you mentioned, is the radio frequencies coming from our phones, our Wi-Fi, all of our wireless devices. So anything that is communicating without wires is giving off the radio frequencies. And so the radio frequency coming from your cell phone versus your Wi-Fi router versus your Bluetooth versus your Fitbit, not really a lot of difference. I mean, the power density, the kind of strength that it's putting off is going to be different by device. I mean, some people's router is giving off a whole lot more than somebody else's router. So it varies between device, and it varies between device basically. So it's all radio frequency though.
Mm-hmm.
And even though something has higher power output or higher power density versus lower, it doesn't really matter so much because sometimes it's the lower frequencies that are actually more biologically impactful.
Hmm.
The bottom line really is that all of these are non-native, what we call non-native EMFs. So, the Earth has its own EMF field. It has the Schumann resonance, which is about 7.83 hertz. But the non-native frequencies are completely foreign to our bodies. So this Schumann resonance we have evolved with. Our biology is actually in tune with it, and that's what our DNA is kind of looking for. But when we come into contact with all these non-native EMFs that our body has no idea what to do with, that's where the problem comes in. So, it doesn't matter if it's your Fitbit or your phone or your smart washer and dryer, whatever it is, those radio frequencies are going to have biological effect.
So I imagine like the more people you have in a household with a phone, the more you have like Alexa in every room. I probably just turned mine on when I said that. Or like you said, smart appliances, like I guess, each thing that you're bringing in is increasing that. Like if you
Yeah.
only had one phone in the house, it would make a difference versus, 5 people who all have phones.
Yeah,
Correct.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. So all this smart stuff might not be so smart.
Well, I mean, I would say absolutely not. I was doing a home assessment for a client just last week, and her daughter's bedroom was above the garage. And we had identified so many things. Their thermostat was radio frequency, their TV, of course, their Wi-Fi, their phone. So we had identified so many things, and we were turning everything off. And I just couldn't figure out what was happening in her daughter's bedroom, because every time I pointed my meter kind of down, the frequency would go up. And I was like, what is this? Because there's nothing in the garage. And so
Mhm.
finally I kept digging. It turned out their water softener has a Wi-Fi signal on it.
Hmm.
And I'm like, why does your water softener, what is it going to communicate with you for? And she said, well, twice a year you have to refill it with salt. So it sends you a message on your phone to tell you that your salt is low.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, okay, this is 100% unnecessary. For one, we're bringing radio frequency into the environment that we really don't need. And for two, we're increasing the energy bill. I mean, that is pulling energy from somewhere. For, a message that it's going to send to you twice a year, that's absolutely
Mhm.
unnecessary. So you don't even know. I mean, you're buying a refrigerator, it's going to have a radio frequency on it. A lot of them do. Her washer and dryer, it took us a while to find that out because, I'm doing an assessment in someone's house and I'm going around with my meter and they're not doing the laundry. So how am I going to be able to identify that? Well, luckily, I just happened to look at it and saw that it had a little signal on it telling us that it was communicating wirelessly. So we turned it on, and of course, it was extremely high. So many things that we buy now, we're not even aware of the fact that it has a wireless frequency on it, and we're bringing it into our home. So we have to be really aware of that. And you're right, every new device we bring in just adds another layer of that radio frequency exposure.
Right. And like the plugs that you can do now for everything so that you never even have to get up and turn on or off a light. Like I
Yeah,
imagine each one of those too, like everything. It's just
yeah,
compiling the
yeah.
problem. Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned that there were 4 fields. So radio frequency was one of them. Is that correct?
Yep, radio frequency is one. And then the other three fields that we're looking at are, so the first one would be magnetic fields.
Hmm.
And that is what you think of when you see, overhead power lines, high tension power lines. Those give off magnetic fields. And we can't really do anything about those. But inside the house, we could have like a wiring error, for example. So your electrician, for example, has combined two neutrals and a junction box. And, I mean, that gets a little technical, but it just gives you kind of an example of how you can have a wiring error in your house. That's totally legal. It meets electrical code,
Hmm.
but it does give off a significant magnetic field, which, in my research, the magnetic fields can have some more biological impact than the radio frequencies. So I would actually be more concerned about that. And that's not something that any of us really know about. And the only way that you're going to identify that is if you purchase a meter or you have somebody like me or a building biologist come and assess your home to identify that. So that gets a little bit more tricky. The other field would be electric fields. And this is purely just because we live on the grid, most of us, and we have
Hmm.
wires running through our walls. So, I'm always telling people when you think about it, it's kind of crazy that we live in an electrified environment. I mean, and this is really new. This has only been 100 years that most of our houses have had electricity running through them. And 100 years ago, if somebody was to say, I think it's a really good idea to put electrical wires in our walls. We would have thought that's insane. Why would you bring electricity into your home? Like that's kind of a crazy thing because we know inherently electricity can be very dangerous. But we don't think that way because we've grown up with it. We don't know anything else, so we think it's totally normal. So we bring these electrical wires into our homes and though the electrons do not stay in those thin wires, they emanate out and they can emanate out 6 to 8 feet into your living environment. So when we lay down at night, we've invariably got wires right behind our heads if our bed is up against the wall, because that's where the
Hmm.
wire is. And, it's the wires are typically, 12 inches or so from the ground, and that's right about where our head is. So we're sleeping in this big electrical field. Um, Thankfully, though, the electric fields are easy to mitigate, and it's typically just turning off your breakers at night. So in my home, where I sleep in my bedroom, I don't have the breaker is just flipped off always. I don't have any electricity coming into my bedroom because in my bedroom, what do I really need it for? I'm going there to sleep and that's about it. So it works, I've got a lot of windows. So in the morning time, when the sun comes up, I've got natural daylight. So I just don't really need any electricity in my bedroom. So that is one of the main things that we do as when we recommend it. I will say, however, I don't want everyone just to go and turn off their breaker tonight because if your bedroom is sharing a circuit with another room, so you've got another room on the other side of the bedroom, and you turn off that breaker to your room, your field can actually increase because when you've got two opposing circuits, they can actually cancel each other out a little bit.
Hmm.
So this is something where you do actually want to test before you do it. And there are inexpensive meters on the market that people can buy to test this. It can be a pretty simple thing to do. Or you have, again, somebody like me to test this for you. And then once you identify, okay, when I turn my breaker off and I turn maybe this breaker off, it might be a combination of breakers. then you can identify how to reduce that field. And this is getting a little bit more complicated for your listeners. It's not as easy as just turning off your Wi-Fi. But if people really want to dive into this and make the best environment possible, this would be another thing that they could do.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, the fourth field would be what we call dirty electricity. And this is just a phenomenon of living with a whole lot of energy saving devices, or just all of the things that we plug in. So if you look at homes from, 50, 100 years ago, they had many, many less outlets. These days, there is an outlet, within reach pretty much everywhere. New homes are built with tons of outlets because we are plugging in so many things: our TVs, our routers, you know, um, all of the devices that we bring into our house, like we talked about. So all of these devices that we're plugging in are giving off dirty electricity. So it's changing the sine wave. Again, this is getting a little bit more technical, but I like to think about it kind of like a hose. So you have all of, when you are using your hose and you turn the water on, all that water goes to the nozzle. But if you've got a nozzle on there, it will stop right at the nozzle. So it gets backed up. So there's all of this pressure until you release that nozzle, and then all the water flows. So when you reach an energy saving device, say an LED light bulb, LED light bulbs give off quite a bit of dirty electricity. So all of this, our 60 hertz are flowing through the wires to the light, and then it's changing that frequency, and it's reducing the power because it's energy saving. So where does all of that power go? The 60 hertz is going through the wire to the light bulb. So it kind of, I equate it as a visual of, it kind of backs up and then it comes out into your environment because it has to go somewhere.
Hmm.
So, and that is another field, the dirty electricity, that can be very, very biologically impactful that most of us have no idea about. The good thing is that you can filter them. There are green wave filters, and there are Graham-Stetzer filters, Stetzerizer filters, that actually will filter out this dirty electricity. So we can mitigate that one, which is good.
That is good because, it's going more and more the direction of LED everything, it's hard to even find, an old school light bulb or anything like that around. Everything is becoming more energy efficient, but this is such an interesting perspective that I had no idea that,
Yeah, it's not something that any of us are thinking about. You can still get
yeah,
incandescent bulbs. They still sell them. What is it? There's a website called 1000bulbs.com where you
uh-huh.
can get them very, very cheaply. And my closet is full of them, because I just won't. I understand the concern, and the response I usually get when I'm talking about this is, but the LED light bulbs are energy saving, and we need to be responsible citizens. And I understand that, but there's a lot we can do to cut back on our electricity usage to be responsible. And when my
Mm-hmm.
health, when it comes to my health and my client's health, an incandescent bulb is it's so much healthier. For the other reasons too, for the flicker that the LEDs give off, which is really disrupting to our nervous system. So we just have to be more mindful about our practices and just keep those lights off. We shouldn't be turning off all the lights in our house at night anyway. So we can practice, better habits to be cognizant about our energy usage and still be able to use our incandescent bulbs.
Yeah, and I think this is a good lead in to just giving like some actionable steps, in relation to these four fields, which we've kind of talked a little bit sprinkled throughout. I just want us to give them like a good summary of here's some things you can do today. So, like so far we've talked about turning off your phone. What about like having your phone on your body? Like for women, it's a little easier. We have bags, purses, that kind of stuff. But for men, a lot of men have their phone on their body all the time. What's
Yeah.
the impact of that?
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, we know the science is really clear about lowered testosterone and lowered sperm count with men who keep their phones in their pants pocket. So
Mm-hmm.
we do want to be really careful about that. And it is a little tricky because men are going out with their phones in their pockets all day long, and where are they going to put it? Well, my answer to that would be you don't have to have it in your pocket all day long. So if you're walking from, your car to your office, you can have it in your pocket, but just take it out as soon as you get to your office, or wherever it is. So one of the biggest things we can do is actually have our phone in airplane mode as much as possible. And
Mm.
that would also include having Wi-Fi off and Bluetooth off. So you have to get all three because these are all giving off radio frequencies. So,
Mhm.
I get a lot of pushback on this because people say, well, how are people going to call me? And my answer to that is usually, do you have to be on call 24/7? Is that a healthy habit for you to have? None of us should be on call 24/7.
Mhm.
We need to have our own personal time. We need to have downtime. We need to have relaxation time. Being available at all hours of the day, I argue, is a really unhealthy habit. If you're an emergency room physician, I understand maybe you have to be on call. But the rest of us, you know, it's only been 5 or 10 years since smartphones have been in existence. And we have existed for hundreds of thousands of years without being available 24/7. I think we can still do it. So,
Mhm.
and when I find that when my clients put this into practice, they get a lot of benefit from it, a lot of unexpected benefit, more calm in their life, just better stress tolerance, their relationships even improve. I mean, there's a lot to gain from having some disconnecting during the day. Having it on airplane mode, Bluetooth off, Wi-Fi off is one of the absolute best things we can do. And when you do that, you can still use your iTunes if you're using that or listening to your podcast. You can still have your alarm and a lot of your apps that you use. They will still work without that connectivity. The other thing is just distance is really what's key here. So people will say, well, I'm not going to hardwire my computer because I'm getting 20 signals on my computer from all of my neighbors. But what they're not realizing is the sensor in your computer is much more sensitive than is actually realistic. So it's picking up those signals, but you're not getting a hit from those signals as much as you would think. So the closer you are to your router or the closer you are to your phone, there's something called the inverse square law, which means that the closer we are to the frequency, our exposure is exponentially increased. So, putting the phone to your head is going to be the worst thing we can do. Putting it on
Mhm.
speakerphone and putting it on the table actually decreases the field pretty significantly. So, distance is key here. So, the further we can keep our device from our body, like you're mentioning, is one of the best things we can do. So if we're a woman, we put the phone in our bag. We can put it in our backpack. When we get to wherever we're going, we put it on, in another room or on the table away from us. So as much distance as we can have from those devices, the better it's going to be. And then, like I said, keeping it on airplane mode as much as you can. I have one that I unfortunately had to get because I do a lot of traveling in the summer times. I typically don't use it, but I will turn it on maybe once a day just to check messages and to check any texts. And then people know that they're not going to hear from me immediately. It might be the next day. And I think that that's a completely reasonable expectation.
Mhm. I mean, that's the way it used to be. You couldn't
Right,
get a hold of someone 24/7.
right, exactly.
Um, and yes, we've had electricity for many, many years. So some of these things have been an issue, forever. But even more of a reason to get educated on this right now is the more devices we start bringing on the scene and the more smart appliances and smart homes, we've got all that exposure from the traditional electricity, but we just keep piling it on and piling it on. And our bodies aren't meant to withstand all that. It's just wearing us down. And there's so much sickness, so many allergies. Like our immune systems are compromised. And so this stuff can really go a long way. in helping, giving our body, more of a fighting chance.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. So I'm dying to hear your opinion on AirPods, because
Oh,
every teenage kid is walking around with them in right now. I have
yeah.
teenage daughters. They're on the Christmas list. I have not pulled the trigger because they make me really nervous. So I actually told them I'm doing this podcast on Monday. I'm going to get the scoop, the
Yeah.
real scoop, and we'll make an educated decision, because I don't know. This one just seems
Yeah.
like they're in your ear. They're right next to your brain
Yep.
all the
Yep.
time.
Well, I would say your intuition is right on. I'm obviously not a fan. I agree with you 100%. This is radio frequency. You're putting it as close to your brain as you can get it. And,
Mm-hmm.
they're communicating to each other. So it's going to go from, well, this is what we think, actually. I need to confirm this for sure. But the thought is that one communicates to the other, through your brain. And even if they didn't, the radio frequency that they're giving off, that you're putting on each side of your brain, I just don't understand. I mean, why? Why would you risk that? Even if you want to say the science is inconclusive, are you still going to risk it? It's just not worth that at all. So yeah, substantial radio frequency that you're putting right to your brain. I mean, a um, wired earbuds work just as well, if not better. So it's not like it's that inconvenient. It's not like it's attached to the wall and you can't move around. You just got to be smart about this and just use your brain. If you're gonna listen to your music or whatever it is, just use a wired ear set, because it's just, it's miles healthier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's what I was wondering too. I mean, I'm sure there's probably still a little bit of issue there, but nothing like that Bluetooth signal, like right next to your brain.
Yeah, agreed.
Um,
I'm actually, like, right now I'm talking to you on an air tube headset. So that would be actually the best option. And it's just the wires stop about where your chest is, and then the rest of the tube is just air. So this, you still get the sound, but you don't have actually an electric field or a magnetic field emanating through the wire, because that last bit is just air. So air tube headsets would be the best option.
oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. What are some other tips that you give people to get started, just in general, with decreasing, some
Yeah.
more exposure here?
So one of the easiest things that people can do is just turn their Wi-Fi off at night.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, I like everyone to be hardwired. So I am hardwired here in my house. I'm talking to you through my computer, which is hardwired with an Ethernet cord. That's ideal. I understand not everybody's going to do that. So if that's not an option for you, at a minimum, turn your Wi-Fi off when you're not using it, or at least at bedtime, because you don't need it when you're sleeping. Some people will say that that's not possible because somebody in the house is using it all night long, or for whatever reason, it's they have roommates, or they're sharing the Wi-Fi signal, whatever it is. There's a lot of ways that you can actually reduce the frequency. So you can buy a Faraday cage. They make like metal boxes that are mesh that you can actually put your router inside of, and that
Mm-hmm.
will you'll still get the signal, but it will reduce the frequency quite dramatically. And then I also use cloth that has silver woven through it. You can't tell at all; it just looks like a regular piece of cotton. It's highly effective. So I have people wrap their routers in the cloth, and it will reduce the frequency by up to 90%, 99, even more, even 95%, which is really dramatic. And you're still getting your signal. So why wouldn't you? Um,
Right, right.
yeah.
And then you mentioned distance too. Like we were talking about distance, with the phones not being on your body or on your face when you're talking.
Mhm.
But the router, like the physical location of your router, I imagine is pretty important too. Like I'm thinking right now as we're talking, we have an office upstairs. So my router is upstairs where all our bedrooms are, where we
Mm.
sleep every night.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so that's a problem, right? I mean, it probably should at least be downstairs, like somewhere where you're spending less time, right?
Yeah, yeah, I would definitely say that. Yeah, that's a pretty common scenario. I know many people where the router's underneath their bed. And of course, your exposure is going to be dramatically more the closer you are to it. So yeah, putting it as far away from the bedrooms as possible is ideal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Wi-Fi and routers and our phones.
Yeah, so Fitbits, Apple
Mm,
Watches, all of these things, I'm not a fan at all. In fact, I teach classes, some health classes for the local hospital here, and last week I had a student in my class. She was maybe about 13, and I just happened to look at her wrist, and she had this big burn in this perfect diamond shape. And I went up to her and I said, "Do you wear a Fitbit?" And she said, "Yeah, I don't know, I don't know why it's doing that. I just keep getting these big lesions on my arm from it." She goes, "It doesn't hurt or anything, but it's probably just a rash." And I thought, well, if it was a rash, it would bother you. It would hurt. It would itch. Like that's a radiation burn. That's not okay. And so I was encouraging her to consider if that was something that she wanted to keep doing. But I mean, it's astounding to me that we're wearing these devices that are supposed to be tracking our health, and they're emitting radiation directly onto our body. So I'm not a
that's
fan of those. We can live without them. So we got to kind of think about all of this stuff we're bringing into our house. Like you mentioned, the smart speakers, all of this, the Bluetooth devices. We just have to raise some awareness about it, because a lot of us aren't even aware of all the stuff in our lives that are emitting that radio frequency. So that awareness is, an important piece.
that's a huge piece. And I'm going to need to digest even everything we talked about here today, and I'm
Yeah.
sure you find that with so many people because this is so eye-opening. And again, we say this all the time when it comes to holistic health. It's very much going against the grain,
Mhm. Yeah,
you know?
absolutely, absolutely. And that
And
makes it very difficult. It's tough when everybody is doing one thing. It's very difficult to be the odd person out and do something else. Absolutely.
it is. And I know a lot of our listeners are moms. And even though we can get on board and we can understand it, like, oh goodness, this goes just like kids, with eating, same thing. Like, I just think, again, I have two teenage daughters, and this is a hard battle because everybody has this stuff,
Mhm.
but they're old enough to understand what you're saying, and get educated on it themselves. Yeah. And so I guess, as mothers, one of the biggest things we can do is let our teenagers listen to this podcast. Let them get educated on it, not just from our mouths. We can tell them this stuff all the
Mhm.
time. They don't always listen to mom. They just think you don't want to spend the money on the AirPods or whatever the case may be.
Yeah,
But
that's yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, yeah.
right, right. Like, this is definitely looking out for their best interest, and educating our children, who are of age to start to understand this stuff. And, for the little ones that don't have the devices yet, just out of the gate, having good, like, digital hygiene, teaching them
Mhm.
that, like we teach them to brush their teeth and wash their face. And I mean, these are things that they're not getting these messages really anywhere else at this point. It is up to us in our own homes to do this educating, and form these healthy habits, as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't say it better. We have to, it's about education and awareness, because
Hmm.
and modeling, right? We have to model our behavior so that they, setting a good example. And it's tough. I'm not gonna deny the fact that it is an easy thing or a tough thing to do, because it's a challenge to disconnect. Like I mentioned, that phone addiction is real. Having that connectivity, our kids' friends are all doing it.
Hmm.
It's a difficult topic. I totally recognize that. But when it comes to our health, I think that we have to be brave and make those tough decisions, because this isn't something that we want to expose our children to.
Right. And we need people like you educating on this topic so
Mhm.
that they can understand, why. The why behind it is
Right.
so important. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of this today. Again, you've certainly given me a lot to think about. I'm sure everyone else too. This is I put show notes on the bottom of
Oh,
every
great.
episode. And, it has a lot of details about the things, that we talk about. And this one especially, there's going to be some specifics highlighted in these show notes to give everyone some actionable steps to start to take control of this very important issue. So
Great.
anything else that you want to share with us in closing today, Cathy?
Well, I guess I would say if anybody wants to kind of dig a little deeper, you can go to my website. I've got videos on the website, which, for some people, watching a video is much easier than kind of digging through the research. So those videos are, experts in the field that are talking about the exposure. Those are good to watch. I've also got a couple blogs. I've got one blog that's 10 easy steps to reduce your EMF exposure. I would recommend checking that out because this is, we covered a lot. It's a little overwhelming. So that blog post can be pretty simple for people to download and just, kind of wrap their heads around.
Stick it on their fridge.
Yeah, right,
Print
right.
it
Yeah,
out and put it on a board or a fridge somewhere. Yeah.
absolutely. And then, if they really want to get serious about this, hiring a building biologist in your area is one of the best things you can do for your family's health. Just have an assessment done so that it really offers a lot of peace of mind. So people put this off a lot, and I'll have somebody call me and they're like, well, I was going to call you about a year ago, but it was just overwhelming. But once I do it, and the peace of mind that they get from that is so worth it. And then lastly, I'm in the process of developing an online sleep course. Like I said, my specialty is sleep. So in early to mid-February, I'm going to be launching this 8-week module. But inside that program, I've got an entire module about EMFs, and I take everyone step by step on how to reduce their exposure. The entire course is really worth that module in itself. Because it's video based. So I'm going around my home. I'm showing everybody what the fields look like, how to test if they want to buy their own meter, how to mitigate, how the costs work, and I get really, really deep into how to really protect yourself and how to take control of the situation. So that would be another opportunity if people want to dive even deeper into this. And there's a lot of other resources online. I just encourage people to, go on YouTube, go on my website, go on other people's websites to look this up and kind of see for yourself what's going on here.
Yeah, well, that's really exciting about those modules you have coming out. And will that be accessible through your website?
It will be. It's not up yet, but
In February, yeah.
Yeah, I could send you a link if you wanted to add that to the show notes of how people can get on. Right now, I'm running just a VIP list.
Okay.
So people can sign up on the VIP list, and that will give you early access to registration and a discounted cost on the whole course, pretty substantial, and some extra bonuses.
Ooh, yes, we would love that link. And I'm also going to put a link to your website in the show notes as well, just to make it
Great.
really easy for people to click on it and head right there. So
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much. This was super educational. We really appreciate your time.
Good. Yeah. Thank you, Lori. I'm so glad that you're willing to have this conversation and to bring this topic to your listeners, because it often is just that missing piece of people's health. And, being proactive and raising awareness about this is actually obviously my passion. So thank you so much for helping with that.
Yes, and we're all about prevention. Don't wait until someone's sick and you can't figure it out, which is probably the majority of the calls that you get are people who, they already have a problem. So, bringing the awareness to this today and having people preventatively start to take these steps is what we try to do to avoid problems down the road. Very empowering.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lori. I'm so happy again for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you.
That's it for today. For more from Kim, you can go to kimmaravich.com. For more from Lori, go to simplympoweredllc.com. We're always open to listener questions or suggestions for the show. You can email those to contact@awholenewyou.podcast.com. We'd also love it if you joined our Facebook community and followed us on Instagram. Just search for A Whole New You Podcast. And lastly, if you'd be so kind as to leave us a rating and review in iTunes, we would really appreciate that so more people can find our show and join our community. We'll see you next week.